This webinar is very timely and appropriate. While we exporters and importers speak amongst ourselves and discuss on how to further grow the sector, it is not every day we get an opportunity to deliberate with an academician who can not only validate our recipes for success, but also provide insights we might be missing on. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, it gives me great pleasure in introducing Professor Manoj Pant, Director and Vice Chancellor, Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, to share his insights on foreign trade policy in the COVID era. A brief bio about Professor Pant has been emailed to all of you. IFT is one of the premier institutes for MBA in the country with a special focus on foreign trade management. Merchandise exports in June 2020 declined to USD $21.91 billion from $25 billion in June 2019, registering a decline of 12%. However, the decline was much lower than May 2020 and April 2020. This gradual improvement can be attributed to full or partial unlocking of essential economic activities worldwide and the subsequent rise in global demand, however, at a very slow pace. Major commodity groups that recorded positive growth during June 2020 vis-a-vis June 2019 include iron ore, oilseeds, rice, organic and inorganic chemicals, drugs and pharmaceuticals, tobacco, amongst others. However, many sectors like gems and jewelry, leather products, man-made yarn, petroleum products and marine products, tea and engineering goods continue to decline. For the first time in 18 years, however, India has turned a net exporter of merchandise trade with a surplus of $0.79 billion during June 2020, as against a deficit of US $15.28 billion during June 2019. With the changing world order and the political, diplomatic, and economic push and pulls at play, it is time to relook at our foreign trade policy and make it reflective of the opportunities available to us and also the aspirations of the Indian industry. Professor Pant, we have some broad topics, and if possible, we would like you to share your insights on them while enriching us. The first, importance of local manufacturing and the local market on one hand, and how India can plug itself in the global supply value chain on the other. In this context, what specific structural changes are needed for India to make in India for the world? The number two theme is specific actions the government can take to ensure global companies look at India when they are considering an alternate to China for manufacturing. The third one, Professor, India has a very low share of world's top import items like electronic and machinery. In 2018, India's exports of electronics and machinery were a piddly $11.8 billion and 20 billion respectively, while those of the global exports were 2.8 trillion and 2.3 trillion. It is true that in the coming days, artificial intelligence, robotics, Internet of Things, and other newer technologies will matter a lot. What policy prescription you suggest to improve our overseas presence in these areas? The fourth point is about logistics. Niti Aayog strategy for New India suggests that logistics is a big impediment to Indian exports, and more than 4 to 5% of exports can be increased by reducing the cost of logistics alone. So we would like to know your thoughts on this aspect. Professor, the other aspect which many of our members have highlighted to us is about the existing free trade agreements. How should they be recalibrated? And how can we tap into our unlocked export potential, given that our utilization ratio is at around only 20%? And if this can be harnessed, how can we channelize these FTAs in the coming days? Amongst a lot of gloom and doom in many industries, we see exports as a beacon of hope and believe the right nudges from the government can allow Indian exports to achieve exponential growth. With my long wish list that I've already laid out for you, I would now request Professor Pant to share his views and enlighten all of us with his presentation.
Thank you, Mr. Shah, Mr. Kyal, Chairman MCCI, all the listeners. Thank you for inviting me for this session for the viewers of MCCI. Now, there's a long list. I think most of these are sort of covered somewhere or the other in what I plan to say. If I miss out on something, please be free to ask me questions. I'll speak for about 40, 45 minutes, and we can have an open house, 15, 20, 20 minutes for anything I may have missed out, so on so. Okay, but let me start by, if you look at the topic, trade policy in a post-COVID world. Now, before we start addressing specific issues regarding specific traders, we must understand, and that's very crucial for the government too, what exactly is trade policy? And that also to me is not very clear that that we know exactly what is trade policy. First of all, let me be very clear. Trade policy is not only about exports, it's also about imports. So it is not as if how much can I export? In economics, when we teach elementary undergraduate economics, one of the first lessons I always teach them is your export is nothing but an import demand. It is not governments which export, it is companies which export. They may be large, they may be small. And the reason companies export is because they expect to earn something from the export to be able to buy things which they don't otherwise have. That is very simple logic. And I'll tell you a very simple test for this. Every time exports fall, within a year or two, imports also fall. There is no case I can think of in history where a country keeps exporting, but its imports don't increase at all. It's not possible. Because we are an interconnected world, the inputs come all over the world. So the trade policy must be not only exports, but also imports. And I explained the reason why. Export is nothing but a way of earning money to pay for imports. Simple. But there's one more thing which has become very important since about the last ending of the last 3 decades, the last century. That is the role of FDI, foreign direct investment. It's not often understood. See, foreign direct investment is actually nothing but another way of trading. Whether you export or import doesn't matter. It is not as if FDI is some other animal which someone else must look at, and trade exports is the same thing. Let me tell you the facts. 60-65% of world trade today, 60-65% takes place between subsidiaries of the same international firm. And don't think these are big predatory firms. Everyone immediately thinks of America and Exxon and Hindustan Lever. They are small firms. Try to understand Switzerland, Taiwan, South Korea. A majority of the export from based on small firms. Switzerland has no large firms except a few like Nestle. But the biggest exports even to India from Switzerland is of machinery, all by small machines. Let me give you a small example. Everyone's heard about Swiss clocks. Swiss clocks is a handicraft industry in Switzerland. Small families. Someone living in, some small place. Maybe someone living in one colony in Delhi or someone living in a street somewhere in Calcutta. It is not large companies. So remember, so that's the point I'm making. What has happened in the last 2-3 decades is production is now fragmented. International costs of communication have declined so much that production is now fragmented. So no one tries to make a product which belongs only to them. Made by them, input by them, and there's no such product existing in the world. Let me be clear about what trade policy is about. Total trade, including FDI, it is not only about exports. And let me carry on from there. Now let me just get to this next thing, which I guess the fault is economists. See, economists are like lawyers. They are never willing to say we don't know. No lawyer will say I don't know. So no economist say I don't know. Let me be very clear. Let me just look at this COVID crisis. Before people get too depressed about the COVID, it doesn't matter. I'll tell you why. No, I'm not saying the medical crisis doesn't matter. I'm saying from the point of view of trade doesn't matter. I'll tell you why. Look at the numbers. I'll just give you one or two numbers. 40, just think of it this way. In 2019, exports and imports of goods and services of India fell to almost zero in April 2020. Almost zero. If you look at 38% and 47% decline over 2019, both in goods and services, if you look at only commodity trade, merchandise trade, then your exports and imports fell by 60 and 59%. This is not possible. This is not an economic crisis. No economic crisis has ever had such a dramatic fall in either exports or imports in 1 month. So first of all, this COVID was not an economic crisis. COVID was a medical crisis. Look to doctors for the answers. Don't look to economists for the answers for this, okay? What really happens? All that happened very simple. The world just shut down. Manufacturing trade is roughly about 60% GDP. The world simply shut down in the months of March, April, May, June. Now June, of course, is over. For 2 months, they shut down. If there is no production, there is no demand. If there's no demand, there's no... You separated physically producers and consumers. Simple. And therefore, production went close to zero, except for 2 items: medical items, medicines, pharma, and medical supplies. So most companies switched to pharma, medical supplies trade internationally. And the other thing which continued was food. People have to stay alive, right? I can do without shoes, but I can't do without rice, right? I have to have rice and meat. These 2 sectors, food grains and medicines, pharmaceutical products, would combine would account for roughly about 20-25% of the economy. So think of it. 75% of the economy is just shut down. Then how are you expecting growth? So this is not something which was the economic crisis. So it cannot be compared to 2008, cannot be compared to 1930s. It's an economic crisis which evolved over time. So the 30-35% unemployment. In my article which I wrote in April 18th in Mint, I've written some details about it. And I wrote in that time, I expect that this forced shutdown will bring people back on the pre-March path within 3-4 months. Actually, it happened. I'm very happy to know this happened. But the economists were giving gloom and doom. Oh, we don't know. Maybe it'll take 1 year. It doesn't make sense. I always give a simple example. Think of a cancer patient who's told you've got only 2 days to live or 2 weeks to live. And then suddenly one day he's told, no, you did a mistake, sorry. Actually, you have 20 years to live. Just think of how he will live his life. I actually believe the recovery, once the COVID crisis is over, which is not over yet, once the COVID crisis is over, I believe the recovery could be even faster. It may well be, from the economic long-term point of view, a blessing in disguise. People now say, well, maybe we should buy some things we weren't earlier planning to buy. Lots of people have things to change. So it is not really an issue of what economists, someone is saying put more money in the economy, someone is saying print more money supply. That's not the problem at the moment. At the moment, our problem is how do we get back to February 2020? Now, having said that, was February 2020 a great period? No, it wasn't. We all know that internationally, the whole globe has been suffering from a recession of merchandise production since 2008. World trade share of merchandise trade in world GDP has stayed at around 60% between 2008 and 2019. We are stuck. We are stuck because, well, we don't know what's happening. So let's first get back to February 2020. Now comes the next point which I want to make. So what did COVID do? It was not a normal recession. Do not think that the COVID was something happened and therefore now world has changed completely. No, it's not. And I won't go into details here. The COVID is a much worse medical crisis than earlier. But let me tell you, we had a similar crisis in 2009-10, which was known as the swine flu crisis, the H1N1. The fatality rate there was even higher, though the spread was not as much. But even there, the world bounced. Unfortunately, today, the social media keeps reminding us from hour to hour what's happening and makes us a little more worried than we otherwise should be. But anyway, I'm just pointing out that life existed after H1N1 and life will exist after COVID. But what can we do? And let me now come to the most important part which I want to come to. So basically what I'm trying to point out is, don't think your trade policy is going to change because of COVID. Some things will change, but what can India do? Let's be very clear. This is a program about India. It's not about the world. What can India do? And I'm going to list a couple of points which include some of these. First of all, let's use this crisis to reorient our trade policy. Why? Because crisis makes democracies move from one normal to another normal. We had the 89 foreign exchange crisis, and so we had the 91 reforms. Now we have this great crisis. We can call it the medical crisis or COVID crisis, and let's see what can we do. And what are a couple of the most important things which you can do in terms of trade policy. First of all, and this has got nothing to do with COVID. I can tell you, and I did say in April, it was true, by June, many things are becoming normal. Now, by the way, one question people would also ask me very often, I want to quickly address that. Why were we affected internally? Why were we more affected by the world COVID crisis than, let's say, other countries? It's because in India, labor is inextricably linked to the production sector. We're a labor surplus country. Labor, invariably, production is linked to labor, whether it is a large scale or small scale. No one can do without labor. And labor is one thing that was taken out of the picture for medical reasons, which is why in India, all production came to a stop. In many other countries, all production did not come to a stop. And that's why commodities kept getting produced, because many of them produced by mechanical means. Now, let me give you an example. One number I have here somewhere. I think it's something like 55, I just looked at the numbers today morning. 55% of direct employment is in the agricultural construction sector. Just these two sectors account for 55% of your direct employment. And these are the two most labor-intensive sectors. So when your production shuts, everything shuts down. Obviously, labor is the one affected most because of the nature of the Indian economy and the fact that labor. Now, coming back to my issue. So what is it that we can, so don't be too surprised. Don't be too surprised that, oh my God, you had such a terrible crisis in India, the migrant crisis, etc. It's because of the fact that the country fortunately uses a lot of labor. It is not a machine-oriented production, a lot of it is labor-oriented, and that was bound to happen. Anyway, let's assume that in the next 2-3 months, I'm pretty certain of that, the world will get back to normal. It is getting back to normal. I do believe that by the end of the year, maybe October, we'll be almost back to normal. Question is, what has changed? Nothing has changed. You're still back to February 2020, when the world was recession any day. So let's get back and say, can we use this as a crisis to take steps which otherwise might be difficult to implement politically in a democracy? It happens. And now let me tell you some of the steps. First is re-stress the role of technology. We'll keep having people saying, let's promote exports because they are labor intensive. And let me first dismiss this understanding. It's particularly important for the MSME sectors. Labor intensive exports do not simply mean exports which use a lot of labor. They use a lot of unskilled labor. Now, Indian labor is not unskilled labor, it is no skilled labor. And I always like to give the example of, let's say, Delhi and Mumbai. In Delhi, if you go to Mumbai, let's take the Mumbai film industry, and let me take an example everyone understands. If you want to find out someone who writes a script, then he or she only writes a script. But if you do the same activity in Delhi, then that person will say, okay, I'll write the script, give me some more money, I'll fix the lights also, give me a little more money, I'll put the shamiana, and give me a little more money, I'll do the acting also. No specialization. Even unskilled labor is specialized. What it means is, an unskilled labor is one which can do a repetitive task extremely well. That's what sets out the organized industry from the unorganized industry in India. The organized industry in India is small, but the labor they use is skilled labor. It's unskilled labor, but unskilled of the kind which matters. It is not unskilled means nothing has to do, okay, tomorrow you start making cars. No. So reskilling is a critical component of that. And why am I saying this? Because whether you like it or not, world trade is governed by technology. Any studies I have seen, neither resources nor the mere existence of labor actually makes you competitive. It is very critical to have technology on your side. After that, it is a different issue whether you use labor or not, how much labor you use, unskilled, but the first is technology. And I take you a simple example. In India, can we find 2 plugs, electronic plugs, we talk about electronic industry, which fit the same plug point? You can't. Try it. You cannot find two plugs made by two different people which fit the same plug point. Every one of us knows in our home what happens. Either you open the plug a bit or you constrict the, you cannot take any plug and make it fit into any plug. So no standardization whatsoever. Whether in the plug socket or the plug, just no standardization. So when you say we want a plug made by a particular producer, that also is useless. Unless the socket is one also made by the producer, is not going to fit. I'm just giving an example of what technology can do. Technology can create standardized products, which is critical even for small scale industry. That's the first thing, role of technology. And here is where I would particularly ask MSMEs, and I'll give you some examples soon, to look at the new technology that has come up, not because of natural source, but because of this virus. Because this COVID situation, the digital technologies are flowering all over the place. Right now, they're trying to use it for education, but very soon education will go back to normal after some time. I'm certain it will, but the technology will still exist. So use of digital technology is critical. I'll tell you where. Payments. One of the things which people often fear is that a small industry makes payments, is unable to compete in the world market because they don't have access to banks. Have I heard that? Haven't we heard that? That there is no access to banks. Banks won't lend us money. Even if banks lend us money, how will we find the buyer? The buyer is a very big buyer. That's not true again. Many of the developed countries are major markets. Which are India's major markets? USA, Europe, and now emerging Africa, Latin America, not the East Asian. These are the markets. In these countries, small consumers nowadays are very, very crucial input. They're not as, it is not only the big guys who matter. And the payment mechanism, you know, the logistics which you mentioned, payment mechanism is a critical part of logistics. I'll come back to that later on. So first thing is, remember, embrace and learn the new technology of payments. Because the new technology of payments and the new technology of digitalization or digital connection will allow you to enable you to connect with small buyers. Small sellers, small buyers move together. Small buyers also don't want to go to the big guys because those guys charge margins. I can tell you, for example, I don't know how far it's true. I'll just tell you what's in the paper. The fact that as you might have seen, Amazon is an aggregator, right? Claims $2 billion of exports of small scale industries. Now, I don't know if that's true or not. I have no ways to verify. I'm just telling you the media report, but I wouldn't be surprised. Because what Amazon and any of these big aggregators, Amazon or Flipkart, or for example, for small scale buyers, sellers, RuPay, for example, RuPay does that. They are establishing a connection between the buyer and the seller, which otherwise is very difficult for either the buyer or the seller. And that's a very important function. So plug into that new technology. It will be great, very useful, MSC particular. That's role of technology is critical. You can't keep saying, no, first we'll employ labor and then we use technology. Not possible. You will not be able to survive. Second thing, why is again for MSMEs? And I mentioned earlier, trade policy, please think of FDIs. What exactly does FDI do? FDI is nothing. Why is FDI possible? Because fragmentation of production, which has taken place starting in the 1980s. 1990s became very strong, and particularly after 2000, world production now fragmented. There is the biggest example and gain to India and small scale industries, of course medium, not small, would be auto parts. Auto parts is not a large business. Auto parts is a small business. I mean, there are many small producers who are linking to the OEMs, original equipment manufacturers. Now, what is happening? Everyone's plugging into a global supply chain. An example of China, well, that's all China did. Let me quickly dismiss this China thing which everyone talks about all the time. Think about China. In the mid-70s, China wanted to do the cultural revolution. Stop all this teaching, all production, forget. Everyone back to the villages. Do only farming. Till about 77, 78, till then now Ping came. And 1985, China becomes a major exporter in the world market. Can you think of it? I'm sure you have many people who are exporters and importers in your chamber. Exporter doesn't only mean, oh, I make a small thing very cheap, let me export. There's much more. They're establishing the channels of export, establishing the credit lines, establishing reliability of supplier and buyer. It's not just a simple case of making something and exporting. How is it in 6 years, a country which has never been part of global trade suddenly becomes a major trade partner? And then 15 years later is dominating the world exports. How is it possible? It is not possible based on anything any government can do. The reason it's made possible is China was just alternative method of Southeast Asia, East Asia exporting through China. All East Asian and South Asian countries have had a surplus with China always. India is one exception. Because they export inputs, including Japan and South Korea. They export inputs to these countries. It is assembled in China, they export to the world. One study done at the Brookings by the famous Nobel laureate, Krugman, said in electronic exports, which of course you mentioned earlier, if you look at only computers and telephones, if you subtract all the inputs China got, cost of all the inputs it got through imports, and look at the final value added and what China got, China's value added in China, which stays in China, 6%, that's all. 94% goes to either technology providers in the USA or the input suppliers in East Asia. But 6% is a large amount. See, we have to get onto this political thing saying, are they khali 6%? Otherwise, you're getting 0%. So first thing is, this is the supply chain which had been established from 1980-85 on in manufacturing. I'm not talking about service, I'll come that later. In manufacturing, supply chain in all products was established through the Chinese because the Chinese were the only people, enough people to assemble. Now the question is, so why is this COVID crisis an advantage? Are traders going to normally switch from China to India? Of course not. China may not make things of very high quality, at least not to make, but at least they were of the minimum quality standard. We don't even make standard because we separated small scale industry from large industry. Live in separate worlds. Small scale industry, one separate world, large scale, that is all gone now. Everyone has to plug into supply chains. And the advantage of the COVID, which we can do, and hopefully the government and of course traders will try to do, is how can I shift some of that trade to India, right? That's one of the questions which the presenter raised. Not very simple. Let me give examples. If you look at the top 4 or 5 exports of China to the world, they are basically 3 items: furniture, electronic goods, machine goods. And those 4 items, I don't have the exact numbers, I guess they have somewhere in mind. Those numbers are themselves more than 10 times India's exports. Just those 4. And what are India's major exports? You know. The only thing which figures there is machine tools. It is a major important. So the question is, how can I get onto the bandwagon? You are not going to be able to. So first of all, COVID crisis, right or wrong, the global political crisis, right or wrong, has created a situation where many companies want to diversify from China as the only. You are not going to displace them. But how can I be an alternative, a diversification portfolio of producers? Some will shift their production from China to India. And why? Not because you say so, because South Korea, Japan, etc. think maybe let's look at India too. But you have to provide the function of skilled labor one. That's the first. And skilled labor as unskilled labor as I define it. You have to provide unskilled labor like I'm saying. Not unskilled labor means get someone off the road who has nothing else to do. That is not unskilled labor. Secondly, MSMEs will have to now get into the supply chains. And which is the one supply chain where this way you have really suffered? Apparel. In the early 2000s, 23% of exports were apparel and mid-ups. That has now come down to barely 10 to 12%. You have completely been knocked out of the world apparel market. And apparel was a major export item. Which are the ones still exporting from Asia? Pakistan, Bangladesh. Now, look at the Bangladesh experience in exporting. Is it a Bangladesh experience? No, it isn't. It is run, managed, and driven by the South Korean traders. It's the South Korean people, manufacturers who, when competition on labor cost started going up in South Korea, they shifted to Bangladesh. Why? Because we didn't want anyone to come here. We said, no, only Indians can run the world industry. It cannot be done. This is what I meant about FDI. FDI is a combination of world resources, whether it is labor or whether it is machinery, under one roof to be made in India. And that is the only way it can be done. There is no second way. And if you look at the experience, study the experience of the success of the garment industry in Bangladesh, you will see what I'm saying, crucial role of supply chain. So who are the ones who need the supply chain the best? Well, the big names of industry. I will not take names. Why take names? Don't need that. But the MSMEs need that. This FDI is not crucial for the big names. FDI is crucial for the small guys. Because they are the ones who create a link establishing one production and consumption points through a global production cycle. That is what could shift to India given the current political climate in China. Now, will it last? No. 5 years down the line, if you still haven't got your act together, they'll move elsewhere. No one's waiting for you. There is some kind of feeling, I think, I've heard in some corner where there's sort of predestination. Forget it. There's no predestination. You happen to be at the right place, and you happen to be a place where you've got extremely bright individuals. But unless people know what to do with that brightness in terms of adopting modern technologies and modern methods, they will bypass you. World traders will bypass you. They'll go to Vietnam, Malaysia, Thailand, Philippines, Indonesia, they'll bypass you. So if you want them, you better start your reskilling, most important. And reskilling doesn't mean graduate degrees and undergraduate degrees. That is the worst example. It is very sad that India ITIs get less important than IITs. I think from the production point of view, the ITIs are more important than the IITs. So how do I get the IIT combination of technology and skilling for the MSMEs? I think that's going to be crucial. The second thing which I want to point out. Okay, now what is this? So what I'm saying is there is a structural adjustment that's going to happen. It's not as if trade is going to become very different. But it's going to be structurally, there's going to be a shift. And the most important critical structural shift is the movement away from China. Not because of any other reason. Why would anyone want to put all their eggs in one basket? Especially if that basket is turning out to be, at least politically, not very acceptable to the other world. And your markets do not lie in China, your markets lie in Europe and USA. China may be the world's major producer. It is not the world's largest consumer, by the way. They constitute still only 9% of world demand. They may constitute 14-15% of world supply, but not demand. The Chinese only know how to make you buy. They don't know how to buy themselves. Your buyers are still the countries of Europe, USA, East Asia, and now emerging Latin America and possibly Africa. So that's where your market lies. But to get to that, you have to be able to replicate the practices of supply chains. You've got to be able to replicate the practice of getting inputs, assembling them, putting in your skills and exporting them. That's the only way out. So what is the structure adjustment talking about? Shifting to new methods of trading. You're not going to be able to export something that you never could export before. Let me give you a small example. Take agricultural items. I don't know if any of you are aware, but I have some numbers here I was looking at today. India's share in exports of agricultural goods has gone up from about 1% to about almost 2% in 2019. I have some figures here. I can't remember exactly where it is. It's almost 2%. That's a very large increase. The share of agricultural exports in in global trade, share of Indian agricultural exports in global trade is almost at 2%, much higher than manufacturing. Why? What did we do so well in the last 1 year? And I'm talking about 2019, overnight 2019-20, with all this crisis, because tropical things only grow here. No one else can grow tropical food grain items. They will grow here. Spices, etc. will come in India. They're not going to grow in the climates. So there are certain things where there's no escape for the rest of the world, where how you package, how you process them, how you change the nature of the product will matter, because you have a natural market. And agriculture is one such example. Okay, now let me just come to one or two other issues which I want to make. What exactly do we do through trade? And I'm going to keep repeating, because I often find people don't get this point well enough. All that I do through trade in transform an output into an transform input into an output. And that input can come from anywhere around the world, and the output will go to anywhere around the world. Now let's come to some of the specific issues. Please remind me in 5 minutes. That's why I'm stopping. I'll stop in 5 minutes. Remind me of some of the issues. I'll go back again. I remember one of the issues you mentioned about electronic industry. Now, if anyone thinks that we are suddenly over the next 2 years going to become a substitute for Chinese, you are badly mistaken. We do not have even 1/10 of their production capacity. And no one's going to wait for you. So what is it that you can do? Should you not try? Let's start. And how do we start? The government has been good enough to have given you a large domestic market. But the one thing that we know there's a large domestic market in India is electronic, for example, mobile phones, even other electronic goods. But if at the same time you ask the government to give you protection of all inputs, you will go nowhere. Question to ask yourself is, what is the value added I can create? Can I pay? I always keep saying, exports is something which companies do, not governments. Imports also something which companies do. And they import because they need to process the input and provide to exports. So what you're asking electronic industry, can you raise your value added? It doesn't. They will import more, I can tell you. And I can tell you also, whether they like it or not, some of the imports are going to come from China. Maybe not directly, indirectly. Your merchant guys, all of them sitting around over here, know it. They will not see it on television, but yes, it is true. Don't worry about that. Just make sure you are taking advantage of going up the value added ladder. The value added ladder is crucial. It doesn't matter how much electronic items export. Take your jewelry items, which you mentioned. Now, jewelries, diamond jewelry, gems and jewelry, that's the item. You are major exporter, but also major importers. Could you possibly export gems and jewelry without importing? Impossible. As a net earner of foreign exchange, the gems and jewelry does not contribute as much as other sectors. For example, the agriculture sector contributes much more than the gems as net earners. So am I a net earner of foreign exchange is the right question to ask. It is not a question of do I export or not. What is the use in exporting a mobile phone if as a result of exporting the mobile phone you end up importing inputs worth 3 times that? There's no use. You're not being very efficient. So first thing to do is to understand, can I use move up the value added label? And I'm telling you, the only way I'm going to repeat again is to become part of a value chain. Whether it's electronic industry or garments, these are industries which have fragmented enormously over time. The productions, the inputs can be made all over the world. And you cannot replicate that. I always like to give one example of people to understand the supply chain and the importance of both imports and exports. There have been only 2 instances I know in history, in recent history, where a country decided that we are going to make a product where all inputs and all outputs are domestic. No outside. Can anyone give me an example? Well, I don't know. Obviously, people are not able to speak, but the one example I take, automobiles. The one example is Malaysia, which about 7-8 years ago decided they'll make their own car and they'll call it Proton, completely indigenously made, nothing. It was a complete failure, total failure. After 4 years of failure, that company wound up. It then first set up a collaboration with Volkswagen in Germany, and today they are exporting with that collaboration with Volkswagen. The second example is well known in India. I will not mention it. It's not nice to take names, but we know what happened to that company. That company made 2 cars in February, nothing to do with COVID. Sorry, they made 1 car in February. 1 car manufactured in the whole country. So what is this? You mentioned to me, let me take one of the questions I can remember. You meant to me, what does Make in India mean? Make in India means, can we add value in India? That's the crucial thing. You say made in China. Are you happy to do what made in China is? Yes. But made in China means only 6% value added in China, but that was enough for China to move up. You have to start somewhere. So make in India means welcome technologies, welcome expertise, but value must be added in the country. You must add value. So the electronic industry must ask themselves, so which part can we add value? I want to add value only in making the mobile phone, but I want to buy all other inputs, etc. from different countries where I get charged so much that my mobile phone not worth making. So am I adding value? And I think in future, in your submission to the government, rather than simply saying, oh, so many people are employed in making hard disks, don't make them, don't allow them imported, or don't allow this to be imported. Your submissions must be, so what is the value added that you will create? What is the protection you're asking government to give you as a consequence which will lead to a certain amount of increase in value added? That is the question which is a relevant question. Now, can you mention again, I want to, at the moment, I want to spend about 40 minutes, 45 minutes. Can you raise some of the other questions? Okay, now I remember. One of the other questions is FTAs. So I've answered your question on the China. Can we have production shifting over to India? Yes, you can. Are you ready for it? That's one. And I'm saying at the moment, you're not ready because you don't have enough unskilled labor the way I defined it. Skilling of labor is a critical component of being able to replace China in at least 2 things, which I just mentioned. Furniture and apparel, of course, is there. Furniture, apparel, and there's one more item which I thought of, which is very toys. Yes, toys. Toys is something which is a major industry which shifted from, remember, the Chinese production, not a Chinese production, is nothing but what used to be East Asian production, what used to be South Asian production. That's all shifted. First thing to do is, can I have that shift here? Can I create unskilled labor of the kind that I am saying? Not those with PhDs and doctorates, but those who can actually do a repetitive task well. Okay, that's one. Second point which I was trying to make is, you have to be part of value chains. So stop asking this question of where is the import coming from and what are you exporting and what are you importing. Question is, am I adding value? It doesn't matter where you're importing from, where you're exporting, but can I add value? That's the crucial thing. And you cannot get into that, and I'm specifically addressing the small scale industries. You will not be able to get to that unless you become part of a global supply chain. Don't look at the big guys. The minute you say multinational, I don't want to use that word. It has such political overtones, particularly in Calcutta. Not anymore, I think. It used to have terrible overtones in Calcutta. Multinational, not all big. All companies in Taiwan and in Singapore, all exporters, all small scale industries, some are household cottage industries. Plug into that. Taiwan's a big exporter of electronics, by the way, in case you don't know. But all small scale, there's no large scale industry. But they're all part of a global supply chain. That's the crucial part, not large scale. And supply chain by itself implies FDI. So let's see what the government does as far as linking FDI to your trade policy. Okay, let me go to one more issue. So far, I've been talking largely agricultural exports and merchandise exports. But remember, service is a very crucial part of an economy. Now, let me mention, In 2020, I think around 2000, I can remember the numbers, I think sometime around 2019, 2020 in the beginning, when all exports and everything stopped, only one sector was still growing at about 2-3%, services. It's the only sector. Because services allow a natural separation of buyer and supplier. It does not require proximity of inputs and outputs. That's the nature of it. Apart from that, please remember, India has performed extremely well in services. And please don't think I'm only talking about services, software exports, I'm not. If you look at the services sector, or what I think better call the ITES, Information Technology Enabled Services, India's trade in the world, India now is 4 to 4.5% of the global trade. That is huge. After almost nothing in 2000, today we are up to 4 to 4.5% of world trade, which is why everyone knows about Bangalore. But how many people know about Tirupati? Tirupati production cluster, right? Garments. But everyone knows Bangalore. You go anywhere, it's because of this. Now, why? Because services is something which is part of the world production process, and services you can separate the buyer and the seller. And more important, logistics and government policy are not as critical. Logistics, I mean roads, ports, take Calcutta. I mean, I mentioned you are located in Calcutta. Think of yourself. How come Calcutta port? Calcutta port has never played a leading role in development in the eastern part of India. Unlike, for example, Madras or Chennai port, or Trivandrum, or let's say Kanda, or Gujarat. In the east, the port in Calcutta has never played the leading role which all other ports have done for other parts of the country. Why? Because there was a time in the 80s when your ports were so infamous that the freight cost from any country used to be about 2%, 2.5% to Mumbai and 5 to 6% to Calcutta. So they used to say, sab chori kar lenge. Everything gets stolen in the port. And that's something which I think is very sad that that as a consequence of the failure of Calcutta in the period 1950 to 1990 to play any leading role in growth, other ports have had to develop. Paradeep is largely a response to failure of Calcutta. The services is one thing, didn't require all this. It didn't matter that your ports are very unfriendly. It didn't matter that your custom push are very bad. It's a direct buyer-seller relationship. And of course, backed by an education system which worked, and lots of stories. I don't want to go into that part. Now, services, and please note, I don't know if I'm sure your viewers are all aware, the benefits and the relaxation the government has given for loans, etc., for MSMEs are also extended to service MSMEs. It is not only merchandise. Please be very clear. Government benefits to MSMEs, for example, subvention of interest rates, collateral, they will take up collateral, government provide collateral for small industries in loans. It is not only applied to the manufacturing sector, the clarification also applies also to the service sector. Let's look at service exports. And more of service exports are linked in the MSME sector than the organized sector. You cannot have an MSME making car. It is by nature a large industry. But there can be any number of small people. There is no scale. It is service sector is scale invariant. It doesn't matter. Scale of operation doesn't matter. You can link to a manufacturer. So think also of service exports, and that's where something I think we should do. Let me just take up one more issue which you mentioned, and then we'll come back to some of the other issues that you mentioned. FTAs. Now, first of all, the question you raised about FTAs, well, first of all, India doesn't have too many FTAs. There's only one which is operative, and that is the ASEAN one. The Japan and South Korea only starting is a waste of time, nothing going to happen. We don't trade much anyway with Japan and South Korea. We have hardly any merchandise trade with these countries. We have service trade, but no merchandise trade. And the FTAs at presently only cover merchandise trade. So the South Korean, Japanese FTAs are completely irrelevant. The ASEAN, the SAARC FTAs, some are important, Sri Lanka is important, but in terms of value, not very much. The one which matters, ASEAN, where all this political fighting going on. Why is it that 20%, so you raised the question, right? Why is it only 20% usage? That's because FTAs are a natural method of what is called tariff shopping or tariff jumping. So if my tariff on Chinese imports is, let's say, 35%, or I make it difficult to import because of anti-dumping, then the Chinese company will go through Malaysia and export to Malaysia, right? That's called tariff shopping. So to prevent this kind of tariff shopping through FTAs, all these FTAs have something called rules of origin. You have to show that at least a certain percentage of that product value is added in your country. Even if you import from China, suppose the Indonesian firm imports from China, makes something and exports to India. Then before they can take advantage of the Indo-ASEAN FTA, they have to show that at least 40% of value added was done in the country itself. Now the rules and regulations, I won't even get into ROs, rules of origin are a whole 2-hour lecture by itself. But they are so difficult to implement. And with declining tariffs in the rest of the world, the average tariff in most developed countries, except for a few items, are about 5 to 4%. It's not worth the effort. So FTAs help in terms of trying to increase trade between countries, but they don't work very much in terms of special benefits. Because to get the special benefits in FTAs, it takes too much. By the way, the 20% is not just peculiar to India. It's true for Indonesia also, it's true for so it's true for all countries. In all countries like South Korea I know of, I know case of Singapore and I know case of I think Japan or Malaysia or Indonesia, very few of the exporters actually use the preferential trading benefits of the FTA. Why? Because the rules of origin are too difficult to comprehend. And now there are so many complications. One country's FTA has so many other countries. You don't know which one applies to you. So it's not worth the effort. And PTAs don't really help very much. So that's the first question as to FTAs. Why do India's FTAs, why have they been useless? Well, frankly, I've been writing about this in 2006. We have been making FTAs the wrong countries. We don't trade much with South Asia. Barring agricultural goods, our trade is minimal. 8 to 9% of total trade. The majority of our trade with South Asian countries in ASEAN, leaving of course Singapore, is in agricultural goods. But agricultural goods are left out. They are excluded from the ASEAN agreement. So what is there left? Which is why it makes no difference. And yet the tariff differences are enormous. And although it began at low, made little difference in 2013, by 2021, which is the terminal year of the Indo-ASEAN FTA, you will see rubber and these sectors which are crucial being affected by ASEAN FTAs. Because those tariff cuts will kick in 2000. Most of the tariff cuts are pushed into applying now between 1990 and 2021. Now you will see the effects coming. Why was it done in the first place at all? When everyone knew what the state of our rubber industry is, we are still trying to protect against the Chinese. Obviously, Chinese companies have been using this route to try to get to India. But from 2021, what are you going to do? Because that's part of an agreement. You can't go back with that. So FTAs, the question is, and this is not just limited to your viewers, it's not very clear to me, is FTA a political instrument? Is FTA an economic instrument? I believe in the past, the governments have used FTA as political instruments. This business of political support against China and many other countries has been part of the whole strategy of becoming part of the Indo-ASEAN, and etc., etc. But was that sufficient? I think the only answer I can say is that the present government seems to think, and the previous government also, by the way, towards the end of the years, had realized that the ASEAN FTA is not benefiting India at all. And there are two reasons. One, you're in the wrong place. You don't trade with them, so what the hell are you going to do? Why would you want to set up an FTA with them? One. And secondly, you didn't allow services. Try to understand the Indo-ASEAN agreement. The 2005 agreement said, once the agreement is operational, within 5 years, or within a certain period of time, short period of time, immediate negotiation will begin on trade and services. And when India said, now let's start looking at services, all the countries said, no, we don't want to get into service agreements. Starting with Malaysia and Indonesia. So when those countries were not genuinely interested in getting into a give and take, why did we get into it at all? My same problem I used to have with RCEP. What is there in it for RCEP? For nothing. The only difference of India and RCEP was, earlier RCEP was only Asia, Australia, East Asia and Australia, New Zealand. Now you have brought in China. So what's new? It is still only about merchandise trade. It doesn't talk about trade and services. So there are no benefits to be obtained. Enormous cost. Indian industry is still not competitive. Our tariffs are still very high compared to the rest of the world. So FTA, I believe the move of the government to set up FTA with Europe, UK and USA is a step in the right direction. That's where we trade. And I'm sure these countries will be happy to talk about bringing in services. EU in particular. EU's major trading partner in services of UK, which is now out of the EU. So they would certainly find looking at services very favorable. So I think these FTAs, if we can conclude them, we've been trying to do it for a long time. If we can conclude them, these FTAs will be a very useful addition to India. Okay, I think I'll stop there. I've covered a very vast canvas.
Sure.
You want to mention a few more points?
So actually, there are a lot of questions, but before I give anybody else the opportunity, let me be greedy and ask the first question myself, because I've been itching to ask you a follow-on question. And, Professor, the scenario is this, that if you have to give 3 bullet point advice to MSMEs on how to leverage the scenario today to either plug into the global supply chain or increase their competitiveness or whatever it is to increase international trade, what would those 3 things be?
1, get used to digital technology. Get used to it. It's part of life. Don't keep saying, no, we have a lot of labor. Labor is not always a substitute for digital technology. One is digital technology, absolutely essential. And there are plenty of players around willing to link MSMEs to digital. I know, forget about developed countries. I know Indonesian producers are looking very heavily, MSMEs are looking very heavily at this. Get used to digital technology, 1. 2, the technology of production, let me make 4 points. Second, unskilled labor. You don't have unskilled labor. Don't use casual labor for unskilled labor. Unskilled labor means labor which can do a repeated task extremely well, do at least nothing else but apprenticeship, preferably ITI, is what training. So that's where the government is very important. Don't keep asking the government for 1%, 2% subvention on loan. You can only take a loan if you make something, right? If no one buys the thing from you, then even a 2% interest rate can't be useless, which is what you have today. As I said, if you can't make a socket and a plug which fits everywhere in the country, what's the use in making it? So that's the second thing, technology. Third, how to access technology. So skilling, get after the government, because the government has a major, as far as I know, focus, and this is particularly true, by the way, of Northeast India. Get the government to give you, to subsidize unskilling, skilling of skill programs. Third, the market always exists. And here I'm going to say something possibly controversial because it's political. You can plug into these large aggregators because these large aggregators provide you 2 things you cannot afford. They provide you market research and they provide you links to markets. Can you believe? I know this personally because I go. A bamboo manufacturer in Dimapur. I'm sure many of viewers probably don't know where Dimapur is, Nagaland. Making furniture which finds its way into a home, two homes, one in Denver and the other in Mumbai. Can you think about it also? RuPay is doing very similar thing, by the way. RuPay, that company, is not just a credit company, they also try to help, establish a logistics payment link between buyer and supplier. They ensure the supply, yes, this fellow saying, this small guy, 200 crores, 50 crores, 100, 2 crores, is saying he's going to make honey available in Denver, we are sure it will happen. Plug into these big guys and ask the government to ensure level playing field. That's the crucial part. Let the government set the rules of the game. But don't try to close down these big guys, you're closing down yourself. Who will provide you the marketing channel? The failure of all small-scale industries in most cases has been the failure of the government to market their products. Whether agriculture, so that's one. Yes.
Okay, can I now request Mr. Mahesh Kayal to ask a question?
Please.
Good afternoon, sir. Sir, globally, every country is facing the fall in the domestic demand. As a result, all the government are trying to protect their domestic industry and finding a way of imposing some sort of the duty on the imports which are double compliant. And it is in course it is going to impact the total global EXIM trade. Not only exports from India, but total global EXIM trade is going to be impacted, because almost every nation is trying to protect the industry and put some sort of the duties on the imports. That is one part. Secondly, sir, the ease of doing business and the cost of transactions in India is very high. And now see, we don't at this moment we don't expect much of the fiscal relief from the government. They are in neither they have the resource nor they are in any mood of extending any further fiscal support for the exports or all. So, barring the fiscal export, what do you suggest and what do you recommend that which can help the boosting the domestic demand or the domestic production, or more interestingly the exports from India?
Okay, let me take your first question first about the protection. First of all, again I told you this problem. My only problem, COVID is completely changed everyone's thinking. Nothing new has happened after COVID. People, countries did not restrict their import. They didn't produce anything. No one prevented. See, I'll give you a small example, Mr. Mahesh, and you'll see what I'm saying. In the height of the COVID crisis, in the third week of March, I know a rice exporter who was exporting to the Middle East. His problem was that the buyer there was saying, can you certify there is no COVID in the rice? See, how stupid a question, right? But he had his problem. He said, my buyers in the Middle East are saying, I hope there's no COVID in the rice. How can COVID go through rice? See, irrational responses, you can't do anything about it. Anyway, that's over. Let me tell you, this is not new. This state of affairs also true in February 2000. The world markets were down, and the world markets are down for a very simple reason, that the purchasing power in the West is down. Now that's a separate, complete issue. How can we reduce it? Right now, your problem is, let's get back to February 1st, and then let's look at the only new factor in global trade. If you think suddenly we will increase world demand for diesel, the economists have been talking about it since 2009. Since 2016, every international organization, IMF, World Bank, etc., have been saying 2 to 3% increase in GDP. It's never happened. World Bank says 3%, IMF says 2%. Actually, 0.5%. So it's not happening. So that's a different issue altogether. What's going to increase? What is it that is that? So first of all, our country is becoming more protective? No. Some of it tends to happen in recessions. So are we. Let's not blame India, right? India is doing the same thing. But it is not as commonplace as you think it is. Some of it is because of this COVID business. Even in the case of China, let me tell you, the political factor leading to decline exports from China more than the economic factors. How many notifications have actually gone to customs to cut today the duties you show me? Not that many. It is a political factor. Trader says, no point from Russia, from China, who knows what the... So I'm saying, first of all, let's get back to 2019 and use the crisis to say, how can we do things we should have been doing in 2019? And the only new thing that is left is, so how can I divert some trade from China to India? I can't do it in 2000, couldn't do it in 2020 February. In February of 2020, you could not have done it. You were not in a position to divert trade from China. But now you are, for something you didn't plan. An exogenous event has happened. Political relations, because of COVID or whatever, I don't care, are not very good. And political relations drive trade. Two countries we don't have good political relations do not trade. It's a fact of life. It doesn't matter about the competitiveness. So here you have a new factor. What can I do? And I'm saying from the NSE in particular, look at these 2-3 things. Don't look at 20 things. Electronics to become part of the supply chain. You can't be the only one. You cannot. Just look at the volumes of China. You cannot. Apparel. Your competitors, you'll be surprised, not China anymore. Bangladesh, Pakistan. They export more than that because the quality of the product is more, because they got into a supply chain. So what can you do? Where are you in the apparel? Where were you in 2000? Where have you gone down 2013, 2014? What is the part you lost? How can I get back into that? Third, so that's one, supply chain is the only way. Unless you get into supply chain, unless the foreign investment comes to the country, you will never be able to get production shifting from China to India. Third is regarding domestic market. See, governments can only subsidize, help you with your production. Whether they do it through skilling, which also costs money, right? Government spends money to skill. Or they give you interest subvention. But that will not help you in terms of the quality of your products. Fortunately, the first step has been taken. There's no law, the linking of benefits to the size of the capital investment. I remember talking about against this 2 years ago. It makes no sense. Let your incentives be linked to your export performance. Why should we link to how much capital is invested in your firm? Then the service exports are completely knocked out with the capital requirement less. So I'm saying that domestic market is very, very, very price sensitive, but now they've been exposed to the world market. So they will not take the whole quality. Earlier I had no problems. What to do? If I want to buy cheap, let me take example of Calcutta, I'll go to Chinatown. Where else to go, right? But now they don't. Surprisingly, Chinese electronic exports are not as popular as you think they are anymore at the household level because the quality is very poor. That learning has come. So can you provide quality? How do you do quality control? I don't know. It's for the small manufacturing industry to get together and figure out. So quality control for domestic market and price, very price sensitive market. Domestic world price market is not as price sensitive in Indian domestic market. Technology and government support in the form of reskilling, in the form of, yes, some loan benefits. But the loan benefits only matter if you can first produce it. Right? So I would say that's what they would do. I don't think the domestic market by itself is enough.
Can I ask Mr. Om Prakash for his next question?
Yes, Professor Pant, I have few questions. You mentioned furniture, toys, fashion accessories, bags and jewelry has got a tremendous export potential. Well, as a trade body, we are working on it, but we have certain challenges where we need help from IFT because the government policies, they are decided on an emotional platform, anti-China, for China or whatever it is. It does not help because, as you rightly said, supply chain is very, very important. And in the initial building up stage, the supply chain has to be supported from any country wherever we can get the supplies. And China is an important supplier in this fact. The next point, my request to you is, on the skilling part, we all talk about it. I'm also the chairman of Handicraft and Carpet Sector Skill Council. But I'm sorry to say, it is all a paper tiger and a media hype. We are not able to bring any qualitative change in the skilling of the people because the system does not support. And we need help of IFT in conveying to the government the things needs to change, which is very, very important. Another advantage what the country has is we have the raw material. We have the domestic market, but we don't have the technology. Now on FDI also, you see there is a lot of discussion, but there is no proper roadmap for the MSME industries, how we can move forward. There is no single window approach. So there also we want you all to intervene and convey to the government in a constructive way how to move forward. The last point you mentioned about banks. In our country, 90% of our economy is dependent upon banks. But the banks, for one reason or the another, are not coming forward to support the industry. Government is talking to them, bankers are talking to them, but in reality, it is not happening. So how to bring that change in the country? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Om Prakash, a lot of questions raised. You're right. These are things we keep saying again and again. As I said, sometimes a crisis is time to raise these questions again because people are willing to give different answers from the past. Now, on the first of all, let me mention, please send me a letter sometime directly. Just write to me directly as Director IFT. It will come to me. You can get the address on the website and list the kind of things that you want us to raise. And I'm sure I'd be happy to organize sessions where we can get, maybe good government representatives talk about it. Maybe sometime we can actually do a proper study sometime. Because remember, political rhetoric, you and I have no control on. No country has. Let that be. My question is, political rhetoric does not always mean that is what happens on the ground. I'm interested in the ground reality. I don't care what political rhetoric there is. Everyone has political rhetoric. Everyone has, every other country has. So, can we make sure the political rhetoric does not transform into ground level problems? I don't think it will. That's my view. But please write to me and we'll be happy to say, let me give an example of something we have done like this in the past. Many years ago, not many, but 3-4 years ago, if you remember, there was a problem of the agarbatti industry. It was being inundated by imports. And the manufacturers, they were crying for protection. And the government wasn't willing to give them protection. Because they said, well, consumers say cheaper agarbatti. We were able to show in a study which we did for them that protection may be environmentally sound, it may be actually the rational behavior. And let me tell you, I got a letter that time from the Agarbatti Manufacturers Association thanking IFT because the government actually accepted their view. See, the government says, if I do something by rhetoric, why are you responding with rhetoric? Don't ask me something just because you say I should do it. Give me reasons why. Give them proper written reasons. I have that letter, we'll still keep it. The Agarbatti Association says, thanking us for the study we did for them because the government actually raised protection for the agarbatti industry without, let me make one more point, I can't go over to that. You can raise protection without raising tariff rates. I don't want to go more details. You can protect yourself without saying raise tariffs. Remember, you are subject to WTO discipline. You cannot raise above, but you can raise tariffs without being violative of WTO provisions. China, of course, is easiest, but other cases also you can do it. And we will be happy to have maybe commission small studies where we can do the calculation. So yes, maybe it does not make sense either. Don't expect me to always say yes, yes. Otherwise I'd be a politician also, right? But so I'm saying you as an MSME, you have actually right now, you are the focus because the big guy can look after himself. Politically also, you are the important people. And I would suggest, please write to me, as you mentioned, and whatever we can do, I can promise you that we will try to do it.
Yeah, Professor, we will do that.
Mr. Prakash, let's not,
Okay.
we take it offline because there are others who also would like to ask the question.
Yeah. Thank you.
Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you. I will reply back and we'll continue the debate.
Sure. Mr. Mani Almal, can you please ask your question now?
He has to unmute his mic.
Yeah. Mr. Saraf, in the meantime, if you are ready, we could have your question.
Am I audible?
Yes, you're audible, Mr. Almal.
Professor, I am related to footwear and component industries. Indian footwear trade is less than 3% of the global trade. And there is no doubt that we have made enough of progress in the growth of the manufacturing of footwear. How do you look at the footwear and the footwear component industry now? Because the Prime Minister has also focused leather and footwear in his speech. What we see is still, until the component industry, the chain supply, the value additions are built in-house, the footwear industry will always have to suffer and depend on imports. The problem with us is that Indian government allows duty-free imports of component and accessories to the exporters, of course. But at the same time, there is no level playing field given to domestic manufacturer. As a result, even we prefer to shift our industry to Bangladesh or Sri Lanka to become competitive rather than manufacturing in India. You see, the custom notification is there, 50/2017, wherein a list of components are there. The drawback is given, you give them more benefits. We are not against anything, but where is the level playing field for us? Thank you.
Okay, Mr. Mani, I think I didn't say specifically leather, but I mentioned generally the problem. You see, this is where the problem is. An industry, a leather industry consists of the component makers. It is a very technology. There is a lot of technology involved in leather industry. It is also a function of the basic leather, then the instruments which go into making it, and the labor. Now, if the government gives, for example, the focus of the government is exports, then they have to give the duty drawback to the exporter. And you cannot say, but then don't give them benefits in terms of the inputs, because that is what is built into an export incentive. How is it possible? You are actually asking me, I mean, I don't know the details of the leather industry, you're asking me that what about those people who make those components which become uncompetitive? But the question I ask you is, why are you uncompetitive? Why, if you can match the input price of some other importer, that is what it should be aiming, rather than saying stop his benefit, because if you stop the importer's benefits, then he can't export either. And you cannot have the best of both worlds, and that's how it is. Now let me tell you how it would work. In the context of footwear in particular, let's talk about footwear in particular. You know, the major market for footwear is Europe, especially the fashion part. And the mass market is other countries. Now, you know more about it on the business, I'm not. But what I can make out, footwear, there are two things. There's the leather or the plastic, depending on which kind of footwear you're making. And there's the technology. So there's the upper technology, there's the lower, the sole technology, and then the technology putting it together. Question to ask yourself is, which part of it are we not good at? And why? That's the only answer I can give at the moment. But the government is absolutely right. If they give me a benefit because I'm an exporter of textiles, and let's say you said leather goods, you said leather goods very generally. Leather goods can mean handbag also, leather goods can mean things. I'm taking footwear. If I'm going to be a major exporter of footwear, and I know where to probably be going, Italy, the leading country in footwear. The question is, either I don't have the technology that I can do everything here, or my inputs are uncompetitive. But if I'm going to export, isn't it better at least someone in the supply chain makes some money? Rather than everyone, it's not possible for everyone to make it. So I will have to need to know a little bit more, frankly, about leather. But very often the government response was this.
My focus was purely footwear and component for that. And the component industry in India is very much competent enough now to produce varieties of components. Because only because as soon after the duty-free import, in addition to drawback, was allowed to exporter, the China and all these countries become As it is, they were cheaper. Now they become more cheaper. And once you become more cheaper, definite. And in India, the duties and taxes and everything is extremely high. I'll give you one example of latex rubber. In latex rubber, Vietnam is 50 rupees cheaper than India. Go to Harrison Malayalam or anybody, we are priced at 100 rupees. But in Vietnam, it is costed at 50 rupees a kg. And if I produce in Vietnam, I'm more cheaper than producing in India. Why? Because there is a 50% additional custom duty on import of latex in India. As a result, all these things makes India uncompetitive as a result.
So what I'm saying is that two answers. There's only one answer I can see. For you to be able to trace the supply chain of, let's say, footwear, establish at what point. See, it's very simple. If some input is less than 10% of the final price, then raising duty on that input or making the input duty free cannot make you uncompetitive. You understand? If an input costs only 10% of the final price, even if I remove all the duty on the input, it still cannot make you uncompetitive. In fact, it will make you even more competitive because you can import that and make it raise the value added. Please show me the value added that you create. Don't say that the China imports cheaper because maybe that's something you need to get from China or from Vietnam. So again, please, I'll say that if you write to me, I will say the thinking, you cannot be thinking of the leather industry in terms of individual components or the footwear. You think about the final product footwear. That's the whole concept of advantage. Again, please write to me and I'll make it more clear if you want.
Professor, I think, before we go on to the next question, I think what Mr. Almal was referring to is the import cost of the product, which is, an impediment. So maybe he can get in touch with you and share more details.
It's not clear to me whether, because he was, you're talking about three things. The technology, the final output and the input. Which one are you talking about? If you don't have technology, then you're wasting time anyway. You have to get it. If the inputs is something where the exporter is getting benefit, nothing you can do about it. That's what if is the output? By the way, let me tell you one other example where this is exactly what, and we wrote about this some time back to government, where the problem was that the mobile industry was uncompetitive. It was cheaper to import a mobile to a country than to assemble it here. So who will import? And that's what they have changed. So you can get these. Please write to me again. I'll talk.
Sure, we'll do that. Mr. Saraf, your question, please. And we'll have this as the last question because we're running out of time.
My question is regarding the dumping of newsprint in India.
Mr. Saraf, you need to be louder. You're very, very soft.
Yeah, actually, we are manufacturing the newsprint in the country, and the large scale newsprint is being done in India.
I still can't hear you at all. Can you hear him?
No, we cannot hear you, Mr. Saraf.
I think something is wrong in the system or like that. Internet is not working properly. Am I clear? No.
Coming and going. I think you have very weak connection.
Yeah.
That's better.
Anyway, I can say.
Mr. Saraf, can I ask the question on your behalf because you've typed it on the chat? That should make it easier. So the question is, what should be done when large-scale dumping is done in India, and how should industry react to that? If you could give some insights on that.
Yes.
I'm looking at the chat myself. What should be done when large-scale? Oh, again, it depends on which country. There's very well-known rules of dumping, anti-dumping. Very, very well-known rules of anti-dumping. Which country? Is it China? Please tell me which country.
No China.
Dumping from where? You don't tell me the rules. Anti-dumping, do you know where it's coming from?
Europe. Mainly Europe, sir.
Europe.
Yes.
What
Mainly Europe.
What product are we talking about, Mr. Saraf?
Newsprint.
Newsprint.
Yes.
Now, why do you say it's dumping?
Because they are selling in their country at $650 per ton. In India, they are quoting at $390-400.
So, sorry,
And our cost of production is around $550 per ton. So we are not able to compete. We are already out of the market. Now, 85% product is being sold by the this exported material, imported material being sold. And our industry, 200 industries are closed. Anti-dumping case has been filed, and the proceedings are with the DGTR. They are not able to move because of the COVID. But the situation is going back to us.
I got part of it. I understood a little bit about newsprint, but I kept missing. Did you get what he said?
Yeah, I get it. I get it.
No, I couldn't.
I couldn't, some of Mr. Saraf, sorry, some of your words disappeared. I understood that you said newsprint dumping from Europe into India, but the prices part, let me tell you whatever I know.
It is 650 in Europe. In India, they are selling at $400.
How much India price, newsprint?
Indian newsprint price is around $500. So they are not able to compete. Now they are out of the market.
See, Mr. Saraf, it's not clear. I don't know.
Oh, so he's saying that the European newsprint manufacturers are selling at $650 in Europe, and they're dumping it at $400, whereas the cost of Indian manufacturers is around $500, if I've heard it correctly.
Right, sir. Right. Very correct.
But then I don't understand the problem at all. With China is different, with even Europe. Anti-dumping means someone is selling below their cost of production.
Right.
As long that unfortunately the problem is, it is for you. If you show this is true, I will guarantee it.
Great. So I think that's a very good response from Professor. So without further delay, I would now like to request Mr. Mahesh Kayal, who is the chairman on the Council for Foreign Trade, Merchant Chamber of Commerce and Industry, to deliver the vote of thanks.
Well, after very engaging discussions on the foreign trade in COVID era, I take this opportunity to wholeheartedly thank our chief guest, Professor Manoj Pant, Director and Vice Chancellor of Indian Institute of Foreign Trade, for gracing the webinar and enriching us all through his valuable views and insights. I would also like to share with participants, many must be knowing and many may not be knowing, that IFT have got a very good, well-established lab in Calcutta center also, and they provide that is basically, I can say that the heart of basically the data available in the lab are immense, unlimited data are there. We can get ourselves enriched and informed about all the data, what is happening across the world about the imports and export in any particular commodity or the product. And for anybody involved in the EXIM trade, I think it is must to make one visit over there, look into the database and get themselves benefited out of it. It's an output of a very, very hard work put in by the people at IFT.
Mr. Kayal, thank you so much for the thing. Let me also mention two things. One, those who would like to, please write to me directly on my DIR office, and I will try to sort out your queries as much as I can. Don't send me a query. Can you ask Ministry of Commerce? I don't work for the Ministry of Commerce. But we have our links, and as far as I know, if there's a reasoned argument which is made as to why anti-dumping or something, they would do it. But they need one point. The second point is regarding Calcutta. It has been a big endeavor of my part. We have created something called CNEST, which I created in 1917 December, Center for Northeast Studies. And in particular for small manufacturing industry, we are catering to the 8 Northeast states right now, the 8 sisters, as you call them. But anyone in the eastern part who would like us to look at these issues of trade, etc., he mentioned the lab. We are trying to build it up. And if the numbers of people who are interested is large enough, I can get the NEC, maybe Ministry of Commerce, to help us fund to raise the level of the lab. But please do go ahead, and they'll be happy to welcome.
I also express my heartfelt thanks to all the participants, friends from media, for their august presence in the webinar. I believe with initiative like this, we can find solution to many of the problems and the issues related to the EXIM trade and gain immense knowledge on the trade during this crisis situation. I propose a hearty vote of thanks and request you all to carry this with acclamation. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you, and thank you all the participants.
Thank you so much.
Please, those who are not happy or those who couldn't get full answers, please write to me directly and we'll continue the work after.
So, Professor, we will send you a representation with some of the points from our members, and Mr. Kayal, who is very knowledgeable in export and import matters, he will forward a detailed note from our members so that it will be easy for you to peruse.
Okay, done. Sure.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, sir. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks.